Welcome to the podcast Revenue Checkpoint. Today, I'd like to welcome our esteemed guest, Andrew Dailey. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Ravin. Great to be here. I'm Andrew Dailey, Managing Director and one of the co-founders at MGI Research. We're an independent research and advisory firm with a specialized focus in the area of what we call agile monetization.
This is going to be a great session. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us. To kick off the conversation, I would like to ask about the latest that you are seeing in the subscription monetization world.
What we're seeing in the subscription monetization world is a focus, an increasing focus on customer retention and trying to derive more revenue out of the existing installed base.
Well, do you see growth in the subscription economy actually being that growth causing any impact on revenue?
Well, I think there's still a tremendous amount of growth in the so-called subscription economy. I would say that the subscription economy isn't just about subscriptions, it's about all forms of monetization. All our research over the years has been very consistent in that as soon as a company goes from a one-time charge to a subscription, they immediately want to have the entire range of different business models at their disposal. So it's not just about subscriptions, it's about subscriptions, usage, consumption, bundling, etc.
Absolutely well said. Subscription is the fact that you are subscribing to business outcome, not about just one model of charging. As people are moving into different kinds of monetization models, do you see some of the challenges that they are currently facing?
Yeah, of course, because a lot of organizations aren't instrumented to handle these new types of business models and charging models. And so as a result, what you find is that there's a lot of manual intervention that takes place in the quote to cash process.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this because of manual intervention? Is this consistent with the company's leaking revenue or some of the reasons caused in the market?
Anytime you have manual intervention, anytime you have a reliance or over reliance on spreadsheets and Excel, there's going to be revenue leakage.
How do you define revenue leakage?
So revenue leakage, I'll give you two answers to how we define revenue leakage. The first answer is kind of a more formal answer, which is revenue leakage is the revenue that is lost, the revenue that is contracted but not fully recognized or fully collected from contracted customers. The second answer is, if you look more broadly, revenue leakage is everything from the inability to see what revenue you could be gaining from a customer to what's lost to, say, involuntary churn, to the revenue that you could be cross-selling or upselling into a customer, but you don't have the ability to see inside of the account.
That's interesting. Is there anything that you can share maybe on how you would quantify this? Maybe what's happening in the industry these days with this leakage or churn?
In all of our research and in consistent querying of all the major audit and accounting firms, we've seen that the average organization leaks somewhere between 3 to 5% of revenue.
Wow, that's huge. Andrew, many times when I speak with different experts out there, especially on the IT side, they will say, oh, I have the latest billing system, the best one out there. That should be able to catch all the revenue leakage. What's your thought on this? Are you seeing any other areas or reasons behind the leakage?
Well, first of all, I would question if everyone on the planet has the latest billing system. If you looked at the installed base of billing systems globally, let's be conservative, well over 85% are legacy systems in need of replacement. The second thing is revenue leakage in part occurs because things aren't going into your billing system. You're not capturing all of the revenue that you contracted for, but between the contract Well, between a quote, a contract, and then what goes into your downstream systems, there are some gaps.
Well said. Absolutely. We are seeing the same thing happen. So, what is your advice to the companies when it comes to detecting and preventing revenue leakage?
Well, if you step back from it and say, what's the penalty for ignoring revenue leakage? As one CFO shared with me, she said, addressing revenue leakage is one of the easiest ways for an organization to deliver an upside earnings surprise. Why? You don't have to beat sales harder, right, to sell more. You don't have to pray that the product organization is going to deliver new product, that it's going to work, that it's going to come out on time. So it's a problem that every organization can address and realize tangible both top and bottom line benefits from.
Interesting. Well, it's astounding to see how much revenue leakage plays into the ecosystem and how people should be thinking about it and building their assurance around it. That brings to our next question. How do you define revenue assurance?
Well, so revenue assurance is a pretty well understood term and concept in the world of telecommunications. Why is that? It's because revenue leakage is material to that business and to that industry. But as we just described, revenue leakage occurs in every business. So why wouldn't we apply the same kind of process discipline and tooling to stop the leakage in all these other businesses?
Absolutely, and it's happening. There are different reasons, different ecosystem, but the industry has just started maturing, and more insight needs to go into that. So, well said there, Andrew. Um, with revenue leakage spread across the whole ecosystem, who do you think should own revenue assurance?
Ultimately, it's the finance organization, whether that's the CFO, the CAO, or someone, the controller, someone within the finance organization ultimately needs to own it. The real question is, why isn't it owned up? Why isn't there any single owner today?
Yeah,
Right? We're seeing more progressive companies have a director or VP of quote to cash. So we're starting to kind of go in the right direction, but there needs to be clear line of ownership, and it's got to take place in finance.
thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Another aspect of this is budget for addressing revenue assurance. Companies generally struggle identifying where the budget should come from. They have budget for transforming ERP, CPQ, sales automation, and much more, but none for revenue assurance. What is your suggestion on how should the company think about it?
Well, it comes into any kind of budget where you have, say, within finance or within the CEO's budget, an initiative that says, how are we going to increase margins, for example? This is one easy way, relatively easy way to increase margins. It could come out of the CEO's budget and we say, how do we drive the top line 1 or 2 points? This is one of those ways to justify it. What we typically find is most organizations, once they go down this path, they find that their leakage exceeds the industry average.
Andrew, this is interesting. So, what do you think are the key matrices and KPIs to monitor for effective revenue assurance?
The key KPIs and metrics to monitor when you start to address revenue leakage are really a handful of different things. I'll give you a couple examples. One of the obvious ones: how long does it take to close the books? What's our NPS score? Typically, what you find when there's revenue leakage, there's inaccuracy in the billing, there's a lack of timeliness in the billing, and there's a lack of transparency in the billing. Anytime you have one of those three, and typically you get two or all three of them taking place, it's going to affect your NPS score. So people think about revenue leakage and addressing that as a back office function, but when you look at the ultimate metrics that it impacts, like NPS score, it says that it's really helping to address your overall brand attributes as the customers see them.
Well said, Andrew. Looking at it holistically, where do you see the symptoms of revenue leakage showing up?
How much of your revenue is automated? Automated in terms of quoting, in terms of contracting, in terms of billing. How much manual intervention is involved in finance and in billing as well? How much manual intervention is involved in revenue recognition? So anytime you see a fair amount of manual intervention, or where that manual intervention takes place in a handful of key accounts that typically either represent a high percentage of revenue or a high percentage of margin, there's probably some revenue leakage taking place.
Interesting. Thank you, Andrew. I'm sure conversation today was instrumental in defining and clarifying lots of doubts that our audience have around revenue leakage. Thank you so much for joining us. Your insights are deeply appreciated.
Thanks, Ravin.